Dr. Angela Matthews closed her eyes and took a deep breath as she stepped out of her car. The Saturday afternoon sun felt warm on her face, and for the first time in weeks, she could actually relax. Working at the city hospital as an emergency room doctor meant her days were filled with chaos, stress, and life-or-death decisions. But today was different. Today was her day off. She grabbed her swim bag from the passenger seat and locked her car. The keys jingled softly as she walked toward the pool area of Willowbrook Gardens, the apartment complex she had called home for the past 3 years. The monthly rent of $3,200 wasn't cheap, but it was worth it for the peaceful environment and the beautiful amenities. Angela had moved here right after finishing her medical residency. Back then, she was exhausted from years of studying and training, and she needed a place where she could finally rest. Willowbrook Gardens seemed perfect. It had a gym, a pool, and quiet surroundings. Most importantly, it felt safe. As she walked along the sidewalk, Angela noticed how well-maintained everything looked. The gardens were perfectly trimmed, the pathways were clean, and the buildings looked freshly painted. She smiled to herself, remembering how proud she felt when she first signed the lease. It represented everything she had worked so hard to achieve. The pool area was almost empty when she arrived, just the way she liked it. Angela found a comfortable lounge chair under a large umbrella and set down her bag. She pulled out a medical journal she had been meaning to read and a bottle of water. This was her idea of a perfect afternoon, quiet, peaceful, and completely stress-free. She'd been looking forward to this moment all week. The hospital had been incredibly busy lately. There had been a flu outbreak, several car accidents, and the usual stream of patients who needed immediate care. Angela loved her job, but it drained her emotionally and physically. Saving lives was rewarding, but it came with a heavy responsibility that she carried even when she wasn't at work. As she settled into her chair, Angela couldn't help but think about how different her life had become. Growing up, she never imagined she would be living in such a nice place or working as a doctor. Her parents had worked multiple jobs just to make ends meet, and they had always encouraged her to study hard and follow her dreams. Now at 32, she was living proof that hard work and determination could pay off. The pool water sparkled in the sunlight, and Angela considered taking a swim later. But for now, she was content to sit and read. She opened her medical journal to an article about new treatment methods for heart attack patients. Even on her day off, she couldn't completely disconnect from her work. But that was okay. She genuinely cared about learning new ways to help people. About 20 minutes passed peacefully. Angela was absorbed in her reading when she noticed movement on one of the apartment balconies above. She looked up briefly and saw Mrs. Henderson from apartment 4B standing there watching her. Angela had seen Mrs. Henderson around the building before, usually in the hallways or at the mailboxes. They had never really spoken, but Angela had always tried to be polite, offering a smile or a friendly nod when their paths crossed. Mrs. Henderson was probably in her 70s, with gray hair and a stern face that seemed permanently set in a frown. She always wore conservative clothes and carried herself with the air of someone who took herself very seriously. Angela had noticed that Mrs. Henderson seemed to watch people a lot, especially from her balcony. She appeared to be the type of person who kept track of everything that happened in the building. Angela went back to her reading, but she could still feel eyes on her. When she looked up again, Mrs. Henderson was still there, staring down at the pool area. This time, Angela noticed that the older woman had her phone in her hand. She seemed to be looking back and forth between Angela and her phone, as if she was trying to decide something. The feeling of being watched made Angela slightly uncomfortable, but she tried to ignore it. She had dealt with people staring at her before, especially in professional settings where she was often one of the few people of color. She had learned to focus on her own business and not let other people's behavior affect her peace of mind. Mrs. Henderson disappeared from the balcony for a few minutes, and Angela hoped she had gone inside to mind her own business. But then she reappeared, and this time she was definitely talking on her phone. Angela could see her gesturing and pointing in the direction of the pool area. A knot formed in Angela's stomach. She had a bad feeling about what was happening, but she tried to stay calm. Maybe Mrs. Henderson was just talking to a friend or family member. Maybe it had nothing to do with her at all. But then Mrs. Henderson started walking toward the pool area, still talking on her phone. As she got closer, Angela could hear bits and pieces of what she was saying. The words she caught made her blood run cold. "Yes, officer, there's someone at our pool who doesn't belong here," Mrs. Henderson said loudly, making sure Angela could hear every word. "I've never seen her before, and I know everyone who lives in this building." Angela's heart started beating faster. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had been living in this building for 3 years. She paid her rent on time every month. She had never caused any problems or bothered anyone, and now she was being accused of not belonging here. Mrs. Henderson continued her phone call, pacing back and forth near the pool gate. "She's probably from that housing project across the street. You know how they are. They think they can just come over here and use our facilities without paying for them." Angela felt a mix of anger and disbelief. She wanted to stand up and show Mrs. Henderson her key fob, which was clearly visible on her swim bag. She wanted to explain that she was a resident and had every right to be there. But she also knew that sometimes it was better to stay calm and let things play out. "I don't feel safe with her here," Mrs. Henderson continued into her phone. "Our residents pay good money for these amenities, and we can't have random people from the neighborhood thinking they can just walk in here whenever they want." Angela noticed that other residents were starting to take notice of the commotion. A few people on nearby balconies had come out to see what was happening. Some looked curious. Others seemed concerned. Angela felt embarrassed that she had become the center of attention for something that shouldn't even be an issue. Mrs. Henderson's voice got even louder. "She looked suspicious just sitting there. When I asked her what she was doing here, she just ignored me and kept reading her magazine. That's not normal behavior for someone who belongs here." Angela was shocked. Mrs. Henderson was completely lying. She had never approached Angela or asked her any questions. Angela had been sitting peacefully, minding her own business and reading her medical journal. She hadn't ignored anyone because no one had spoken to her. "I think you need to send someone over here right away," Mrs. Henderson said into her phone. "This is a private community, and we have rules about who can use our facilities. I'm worried about what might happen if she doesn't leave voluntarily." Angela's hands were shaking now. She couldn't believe this was happening to her. She was a doctor who saved lives for a living. She was a responsible tenant who had never caused any problems. And now she was being portrayed as some kind of threat simply because she was sitting by the pool in her own apartment complex. She thought about getting up and leaving, but she realized that would probably make things worse. If she left now, it would look like she was running away because she really didn't belong there. She decided to stay put and wait to see what would happen next. Mrs. Henderson finished her phone call and stood near the pool gate, arms crossed, watching Angela, with a satisfied expression. It was clear that she believed she had done the right thing by calling the police. She seemed confident that Angela would soon be escorted away from the property. Angela tried to focus on her medical journal, but the words were blurring together. Her mind was racing with thoughts about what would happen when the police arrived. She had heard stories about situations like this, but she never imagined it would happen to her. She was educated, professional, and law-abiding. She had always believed that would be enough to protect her from this kind of treatment. The afternoon sun that had felt so warm and welcoming just an hour ago now felt oppressive. Angela's peaceful Saturday was turning into a nightmare, and she had no idea how it would end. All she could do was sit there, wait, and hope that the truth would speak for itself when the time came. Mrs. Henderson continued to watch her from across the pool area, occasionally checking her phone as if waiting for confirmation that help was on the way. The tension in the air was thick, and Angela knew that her quiet afternoon by the pool was about to become something much more complicated and potentially dangerous. The sound of car doors slamming shut made Angela's heart skip a beat. She had been sitting by the pool for what felt like hours, though it had only been about 15 minutes since Mrs. Henderson made her phone call. The waiting had been the worst part, knowing that police officers were on their way and having no idea what to expect. Angela looked up from her medical journal and saw 2 police officers walking through the pool gate. One was tall and looked to be in his 30s, while the other was shorter and appeared older, probably in his 40s. Both wore the standard blue uniforms and had serious expressions on their faces. Angela felt her mouth go dry as they approached. Mrs. Henderson immediately walked over to meet them, pointing in Angela's direction as she spoke. Angela couldn't hear what she was saying, but she could see the animated gestures and the way Mrs. Henderson kept looking back at her. The officers nodded and listened, occasionally glancing over at Angela with neutral expressions. Angela tried to stay calm, but her hands were trembling slightly. She had been through situations like this before, unfortunately. As a successful Black woman, she had learned that sometimes people questioned her right to be in certain spaces no matter how much she belonged there. But it never got easier. Each time felt just as humiliating and frustrating as the first. She watched as the officers finished their conversation with Mrs. Henderson and began walking toward her. Angela set down her medical journal and sat up straighter in her chair. She knew the drill by now. Stay calm, be respectful, and have your documents ready. Don't give them any reason to escalate the situation. The taller officer, whose name tag read Martinez, spoke first. Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Officer Martinez, and this is Officer Thompson. We received a call about someone using the pool facilities without permission. Could you help us understand what's going on here? Angela appreciated that Officer Martinez started with a polite tone rather than immediately accusing her of wrongdoing. She had encountered officers before who seemed to have already made up their minds before asking any questions. His approach gave her a small glimmer of hope that this situation might be resolved quickly and peacefully. Of course, officer, Angela replied, keeping her voice steady and professional. I'm Dr. Angela Matthews and I live in apartment 7A. I've been a resident here for 3 years. I was just enjoying a quiet afternoon by the pool, reading my medical journal. Officer Thompson looked skeptical. Do you have any identification or proof that you live here? The complainant says she's never seen you before and believes you're trespassing. Angela had anticipated this question and was prepared. She reached for her purse, moving slowly and deliberately so the officers could see exactly what she was doing. The last thing she wanted was for them to think she was reaching for something dangerous. Absolutely, she said. I have my driver's license, my lease agreement on my phone, and my resident key fob right here. She pulled out her wallet and handed over her driver's license, which clearly showed her name and apartment address. Officer Martinez examined the license carefully, comparing the photo to Angela's face and noting the address. This shows you live at 7A Willowbrook Gardens, he said. That matches what you told us. Yes, sir, Angela replied. I can also show you my lease agreement if you'd like. I keep a digital copy on my phone for situations exactly like this. She unlocked her phone and pulled up the lease document, which showed her name, apartment number, and the property management company's information. Officer Thompson took the phone and scrolled through the lease agreement. Angela could see Mrs. Henderson watching from across the pool area, her confident expression starting to show signs of uncertainty. Other residents had begun gathering on balconies and near the pool area. Drawn by the commotion, this all appears to be legitimate, Officer Thompson said, handing the phone back to Angela. You also mentioned a key fob? Angela pointed to her swim bag, where her resident key fob was clipped to the outside pocket. It's right there, officer. I always keep it visible when I'm using the common areas. I need it to access the pool gate and other facilities. Officer Martinez picked up the key fob and examined it. It was clearly marked with the Willowbrook Gardens logo and had Angela's apartment number engraved on it. This looks official, he said, showing it to his partner. Mrs. Henderson, who had been watching the exchange with growing concern, decided to interject. She walked over to the group, her face flushed with embarrassment, but her voice still defiant. Anyone can fake documents these days, she said loudly, and those key fobs get lost all the time. People find them and use them to sneak into places they don't belong. I'm telling you, I know everyone in this building, and I've never seen her before in my life. Angela felt her patience beginning to wear thin, but she forced herself to remain calm. Getting angry or defensive would only make things worse. Instead, she decided to address Mrs. Henderson directly. Mrs. Henderson, we've actually crossed paths several times over the past 3 years, Angela said politely. We've seen each other in the hallways, at the mailboxes, and in the parking garage. I've always tried to say hello or nod when I see you, but you've never responded. Mrs. Henderson's face turned red. That's ridiculous. I would remember if I had seen you before. You're just making that up to try to get out of trouble. Officer Martinez held up his hand to stop the argument. Let's focus on the facts here. We have identification, a lease agreement, and a resident key fob, all showing that Dr. Matthews lives in apartment 7A. That's pretty solid evidence. But she could have stolen someone's identity, Mrs. Henderson insisted. There are all kinds of schemes these days. People steal mail, fake documents, break into apartments. How do we know she's really who she says she is? Officer Thompson was starting to look annoyed with Mrs. Henderson's persistent accusations. Ma'am, we've verified multiple forms of identification. Unless you have some specific evidence of fraud or identity theft, we have to accept that these documents are legitimate. Angela decided to offer additional proof. Officers, I also have my hospital ID badge and my medical license information if that would help. I work at City General Hospital as an emergency room physician. My colleagues and supervisors can verify my identity if needed. She pulled out her hospital ID badge, which had her photo, name, and department clearly displayed. The officers examined it carefully, noting that it matched all the other identification she had provided. Dr. Matthews, you mentioned you work in the emergency room at City General? Officer Martinez asked, and Angela noticed his tone had become more respectful. That's a very demanding job. How long have you been working there? About 4 years now, Angela replied. I finished my residency and started working there shortly after I moved into this apartment complex. It's been a perfect location for me because it's close to the hospital, but far enough away that I can have some peace and quiet when I'm off duty. Mrs. Henderson was becoming more agitated as it became clear that Angela's story was checking out. This doesn't make sense, she said, shaking her head. If she really lives here, why haven't I seen her before? I spend a lot of time on my balcony and I notice everyone who comes and goes. Angela had an explanation for that too. Mrs. Henderson, I work 12-hour shifts at the hospital, often during nights and weekends. When I'm home, I'm usually either sleeping or studying. I don't spend much time in the common areas except for occasional visits to the pool or gym. It's entirely possible that our schedules just haven't aligned very often. Officer Thompson nodded. That makes sense. Healthcare workers often have irregular schedules that don't match up with typical daytime activities. By now, a small crowd of residents had gathered to watch the situation unfold. Angela recognized several faces from her building, though she didn't know most of their names. She felt embarrassed that her peaceful afternoon had turned into a public spectacle. But she was grateful that the officers seemed to be taking her documentation seriously. Mrs. Henderson, realizing that her accusations weren't holding up, decided to try a different approach. Well, even if she does live here, she was acting suspicious. When I tried to talk to her earlier, she completely ignored me. That's not normal behavior for someone who belongs here. Angela couldn't let that lie stand unchallenged. Mrs. Henderson, that's simply not true. You never approached me or tried to talk to me. I've been sitting here quietly, reading my medical journal. The first time you spoke was when you called the police. I would have been happy to show you my identification if you had simply asked. Officer Martinez looked at Mrs. Henderson with a stern expression. Ma'am, did you actually speak to Dr. Matthews before calling us, or did you call based on assumptions? Mrs. Henderson's face grew even redder. I could tell just by looking at her that she didn't belong here. You develop an instinct for these things when you've lived somewhere for a long time. The officers exchanged glances, and Angela could see that they were beginning to understand the real nature of the situation. This wasn't about trespassing or stolen identities. This was about a woman who had made assumptions based on nothing more than Angela's appearance. Officer Thompson closed his notepad and looked at Mrs. Henderson. Ma'am, based on the evidence we've seen, Dr. Matthews is clearly a legitimate resident of this building. She has proper identification, a valid lease, and a resident key fob. Without any evidence of wrongdoing, there's no reason for us to take any further action. Angela felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she could see that Mrs. Henderson was far from satisfied with this conclusion. The situation was resolved for now, but Angela had a feeling this wouldn't be the end of her problems with her neighbor. Officer Martinez was putting away his notepad when something seemed to click in his mind. He stopped mid-motion and looked at Angela more carefully, his eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to remember something important. Angela noticed the change in his expression and wondered what was going through his head. "Dr. Matthews," Officer Martinez said slowly. "I'm sorry, but your name sounds very familiar to me. Have we met before?" His tone had shifted from professional courtesy to something that sounded almost personal. Angela studied his face, trying to place where she might have seen him before. As an emergency room doctor, she met hundreds of people every month, many of them during high-stress situations when families were worried about their loved ones. It was entirely possible that she had treated someone he knew, though she couldn't immediately recall the specific circumstances. "I work in the emergency room at City General Hospital," Angela said thoughtfully. "It's possible that we've crossed paths there, or maybe I treated someone in your family. I see a lot of patients and their families, especially during emergencies." Officer Martinez's eyes widened as recognition dawned on his face. "Wait a minute. Dr. Angela Matthews, you saved my daughter's life about 6 months ago, Isabella Martinez. She had a severe allergic reaction to peanuts at a birthday party." Angela's memory was immediately triggered. She remembered that case vividly because it had been one of the scariest situations she had dealt with that month. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, had been brought in by frantic parents after she went into shock from eating something with peanuts at a friend's party. "Isabella Martinez," Angela said with genuine warmth in her voice. "Of course I remember. Her. She's your daughter? How is she doing now? That was a very serious situation when she came in." Mrs. Henderson, who had been standing nearby with her arms crossed, suddenly looked very uncomfortable. The dynamic of the entire situation was shifting in a way she clearly hadn't expected. Other residents who had gathered to watch were leaning in closer, trying to hear the conversation. Officer Martinez's entire demeanor changed. His professional mask slipped away, replaced by the grateful expression of a father whose child had been saved. "She's doing amazing thanks to you. The doctors told us later that if we had waited even 10 more minutes to bring her in, we might have lost her." Angela smiled, remembering the little girl with pigtails who had been so scared when she arrived at the hospital. "She was very brave that night. I remember how frightened she was, but she listened to everything I told her to do. You have a wonderful daughter, Officer Martinez. She talks about you all the time," Officer Martinez continued, his voice filled with emotion. "She calls you her hero, doctor. She even wrote you a thank you card, but we didn't know how to get it to you at the hospital." The crowd of residents was now listening intently to this unexpected turn of events. Angela could see the surprise on their faces as they realized that the woman Mrs. Henderson had accused of being a criminal was actually a doctor who saved lives for a living. Mrs. Henderson's face had gone from red to pale as the reality of the situation began to sink in. She had called the police on a respected doctor who had literally saved the life of the officer's child. The confidence she had shown earlier was completely gone, replaced by a look of growing panic. Officer Thompson, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped forward. "Dr. Matthews, I want to apologize for any inconvenience this situation has caused you. It's clear that you're not only a legitimate resident but also a valued member of our community." Angela appreciated the apology, but she was more interested in hearing about Isabella. "Officer Martinez, please tell Isabella that I'm so glad she's doing well. Cases like hers are exactly why I became a doctor. Knowing that she's healthy and happy makes all the long hours and difficult days worth it. She's been carrying an EpiPen everywhere now, just like you told us," Officer Martinez said. "And she's been teaching her friends about food allergies, so they can help keep each other safe. You really made an impact on her life." Mrs. Henderson tried to interject, her voice shaky and uncertain. "Well, this is all very nice, but how was I supposed to know she was a doctor? I was just trying to protect our community from strangers who don't belong here." Officer Martinez turned to look at Mrs. Henderson, and his expression was no longer friendly. "Ma'am, with all due respect, Dr. Matthews showed you proper identification proving she lives here. You chose to continue making accusations even after she provided evidence. That's not protecting the community. That's harassment." Other residents began speaking up, and Angela was surprised to hear several voices defending her. A woman from the third floor stepped forward and addressed Mrs. Henderson directly. "I've seen Dr. Matthews many times over the past few years," the woman said. "She's always been polite and respectful. She keeps to herself, but she's never caused any problems. I can't believe you called the police on her for sitting by the pool." An elderly man who lived on the second floor nodded in agreement. "I've seen her coming and going from the building plenty of times. She usually comes home very late or very early, probably because of her work schedule. She always holds the door for people and says hello when she sees you." Angela felt a wave of gratitude toward these neighbors who were speaking up for her. She had always kept to herself and hadn't realized that people had been noticing her small acts of courtesy over the years. Mrs. Henderson was becoming more defensive as more residents contradicted her claims. "I spend more time watching this building than anyone else. I know who belongs here and who doesn't. I was just being cautious." "Being cautious is one thing," Officer Martinez said firmly. "But making false accusations and wasting police resources is another. Dr. Matthews has clearly established that she lives here and has every right to use these facilities." The building's property manager, Ms. Williams, arrived at that moment, having been called by one of the residents who was concerned about the commotion. She was a professional woman in her 40s who had always been fair and responsive to tenant concerns. "What's going on here?" Ms. Williams asked, looking around at the crowd of people and the police officers. "I got several calls about some kind of incident at the pool." Officer Thompson explained the situation quickly, mentioning that Mrs. Henderson had called to report a trespasser, but that the accused person had turned out to be Dr. Matthews, a long-term resident with proper documentation. Ms. Williams looked shocked. "Dr. Matthews? She's one of our most reliable tenants. She's never missed a rent payment, never caused any problems, and she's been living here for years. What kind of evidence did you have that she was trespassing, Mrs. Henderson?" Mrs. Henderson was now clearly flustered and struggling to justify her actions. I just didn't recognize her. I thought she looked suspicious sitting there by herself. I was trying to protect our property values and our community standards." Ms. Williams frowned. "Mrs. Henderson, calling the police on a legitimate resident based on your personal feelings is completely unacceptable. This kind of behavior reflects poorly on our entire community." Angela had remained quiet during most of this exchange, but she felt it was important to speak up. "I appreciate everyone's support, but I want to make it clear that I'm not looking for any special treatment. I just want to be able to enjoy the amenities that I pay for without being harassed or questioned about my right to be here." Officer Martinez nodded respectfully. "Dr. Matthews, you've handled this situation with incredible grace and professionalism. I want you to know that if you ever have any problems like this in the future, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'll make sure it's handled properly." The crowd of residents began to disperse, many of them stopping to speak with Angela and express their support. Several people apologized for not intervening earlier and promised to speak up if they ever witnessed similar behavior in the future. Mrs. Henderson stood alone near the pool gate, looking isolated and embarrassed. The confident, righteous attitude she had displayed earlier was completely gone. She seemed to realize that her actions had not only failed to achieve their intended goal, but had also damaged her own reputation in the community. Ms. Williams approached Mrs. Henderson with a serious expression. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to need to document this incident in your tenant file. This kind of harassment of other residents is against our community policies, and there will be consequences." "Officer." Martinez walked over to Angela one more time before leaving. "Dr. Matthews, I can't thank you enough for saving Isabella's life. She's going to be so excited when I tell her that I met her hero doctor today. You've made our family complete and will never forget what you did for us." Angela felt tears forming in her eyes. This was why she had become a doctor, to make a real difference in people's lives. "Officer Martinez, Meeting you today and hearing about Isabella's recovery is the best part of my week. Please give her my love and tell her to keep being brave." As the police officers left and the crowd continued to thin out, Angela finally felt like she could breathe again. What had started as a horrible, humiliating experience had turned into something completely unexpected. She had been reminded of why her work mattered. She had gained the support of neighbors she barely knew, and she had seen justice prevail in a situation that could have ended very differently. Mrs. Henderson was still standing by the pool, but she no longer looked like the confident woman who had made the phone call an hour earlier. The tables had turned completely, and now she was the one who looked out of place in her own community. The following Monday morning, Angela was getting ready for her shift at the hospital when she heard a knock at her door. She looked through the peephole and saw Ms. Williams, the property manager, standing in the hallway with a folder in her hands. Angela opened the door, curious about what could be so important that it required a personal visit. "Good morning, Dr. Matthews," Ms. Williams said with a warm smile. "I hope I'm not disturbing you before work. I wanted to speak with you about what happened at the pool on Saturday." Angela invited her inside and offered her a cup of coffee. As they sat at Angela's small kitchen table, Ms. Williams opened her folder and pulled out several documents. "I've been doing some investigating since Saturday's incident," Ms. Williams began. "What happened to you was completely unacceptable, and I want you to know that we're taking serious action to make sure it never happens again." Angela was curious about what kind of investigation could have been completed so quickly. "What did you find out?" Ms. Williams sighed and shook her head. Unfortunately, this wasn't Mrs. Henderson's first incident of this type. After Saturday, several other residents came forward with similar stories. It turns out she's been making complaints about various residents for months, usually people of color or anyone she deemed different from her expectations. Angela felt her stomach drop. "You mean she's done this to other people before?" "Yes, and I'm ashamed to say that some of her previous complaints were handled poorly by our staff. We didn't recognize the pattern of behavior because she was clever about how she presented her concerns. But after Saturday, when we saw how wrong she was about you, we started looking more closely at her history of complaints." Ms. Williams pulled out a sheet of paper with dates and descriptions. "In the past 6 months, she's complained about the young man in 3C for playing music too loud when his neighbors say they never hear anything. She reported the family in 2A for having too many visitors when they were just having their grandparents over for dinner. She's called in noise complaints about the couple in 5B when they were simply having normal conversations on their balcony." Angela realized that Mrs. Henderson had been systematically targeting residents who didn't fit her narrow idea of what the community should look like. "What are you going to do about it?" "We've already started the process," Ms. Williams said firmly. Mrs. Henderson violated multiple clauses in her lease agreement: the harassment clause, the community standards clause, and the clause about making false reports to authorities. We've given her 30 days' notice to vacate the premises. Angela was surprised by how quickly things were moving. "She's being evicted?" "Yes. The Homeowners Association met in an emergency session yesterday and they unanimously voted to terminate her lease. We simply cannot allow residents to harass their neighbors and waste police resources with false accusations. What she did to you was the final straw." Ms. Williams continued. "We are also implementing new policies to prevent this kind of situation in the future. We're going to have mandatory community sensitivity training for all residents, and we're creating a better system for handling complaints so we can identify patterns of harassment more quickly." Angela appreciated the actions being taken, but she felt a bit overwhelmed by how dramatically her quiet Saturday afternoon had changed everything. "I never expected it to go this far. I just wanted to read my book by the pool. Dr. Matthews, what happened to you was wrong, and it exposed some serious problems in our community management. You handled the situation with incredible grace, and your professionalism throughout this ordeal has been an example to everyone." Over the next few days, Angela noticed a significant change in how her neighbors interacted with her. People who had never spoken to her before were now saying hello in the hallways. The woman from the 3rd floor stopped by with homemade cookies and an apology for not intervening sooner. The elderly man from the 2nd floor invited her to join the building's book club. Angela realized that while the incident with Mrs. Henderson had been traumatic, it had also connected her with her community in a way that years of quiet, polite interactions had never accomplished. People now saw her not just as the woman who kept to herself, but as a respected doctor who had handled a difficult situation with dignity. The story didn't end there, though. Word of what had happened began to spread beyond the apartment complex. One of the residents who had witnessed the incident worked for the local newspaper, and she approached Angela about sharing her story publicly. Angela was initially hesitant. She valued her privacy and didn't want to become the center of attention. But after thinking about it, she realized that speaking out might help prevent similar incidents from happening to other people. The newspaper article was published on a Thursday, and by Friday morning, Angela's phone was ringing constantly. Local television stations wanted to interview her, community organizations wanted her to speak at their events, and she received dozens of messages from people sharing their own experiences with similar situations. Angela was amazed by how many people had gone through something similar. Teachers, lawyers, business owners, and students all reached out to tell her about times when they had been questioned, challenged, or reported for simply existing in spaces where they belonged. The story gained even more attention when Officer Martinez agreed to be interviewed about his perspective on the incident. He spoke about how the situation had changed his own awareness of the challenges that people of color face in their daily lives, even when they're accomplished professionals. "Dr. Matthews saved my daughter's life," Officer Martinez told the reporter. "She's a hero in our family, but on Saturday she was treated like a criminal simply for sitting by her own pool. That's not the kind of community we want to live in." The interview was shared thousands of times on social media, and it sparked conversations about racial profiling, community responsibility, and the importance of treating all residents with respect and dignity. Meanwhile, Mrs. Henderson was facing the consequences of her actions. The story had made her locally infamous, and she was struggling to find a new place to live. Several apartment complexes had rejected her applications after learning about the incident. Her own family members were embarrassed by her behavior and had distanced themselves from her. 3 weeks after the pool incident, Mrs. Henderson packed up her belongings and moved out of Willowbrook Gardens. Angela watched from her balcony as the moving truck pulled away, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. She didn't take any pleasure in seeing someone lose their home, but she was glad that the source of harassment in her community was gone. Though changes in the apartment complex were remarkable. The new community policies had been implemented, and residents were more aware of how their actions affected their neighbors. The building felt more welcoming and inclusive than it ever had before. Angela was elected to the Homeowners Association board by unanimous vote. Even though she hadn't campaigned for the position, her neighbors trusted her judgment and wanted her voice to be part of the decision-making process for their community. One of her first initiatives was to rename the pool area the Community Unity Pool, and to install new signs that emphasized that all residents were welcome to use the facilities regardless of their background, appearance, or schedule. Angela also worked with local organizations to create a community awareness program. Once a month, they hosted educational sessions about diversity, inclusion, and how to be a good neighbor to people from different backgrounds. 6 months after the incident, Angela received a special visitor at the hospital. Officer Martinez brought his daughter Isabella to meet her during Angela's lunch break. Isabella had grown taller and was full of energy, but she still carried her EpiPen everywhere she went. "Dr. Matthews," Isabella exclaimed when she saw Angela. "Daddy told me you're the hero doctor who saved my life, and you're also the lady who had the problem at the pool." Angela knelt down to Isabella's eye level and smiled. "Hello, Isabella. You look so healthy and strong. How are you feeling?" "I'm great," Isabella said proudly. "And I brought you something." She handed Angela a handmade card with a drawing of a doctor and a little girl holding hands. Inside, she had written, "Thank you for saving my life and for being brave when people were mean to you." Angela felt tears in her eyes as she read the card. This little girl understood better than many adults that what had happened at the pool was wrong, and she wanted to show her support. Officer Martinez shook Angela's hand warmly. Dr. Matthews, I want you to know that what happened that day changed how our entire police department handles complaints like the one we received. We now have better training about implicit bias and community relations. Your grace under pressure taught us all something important. As Angela walked back to work that afternoon, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that Saturday at the pool. What had started as one of the worst days she could remember had ultimately led to positive changes in her community, new friendships with her neighbors, and opportunities to make a difference beyond her work as a doctor. She still spent her Saturday afternoons by the pool, but now she was often joined by other residents who had become genuine friends. The pool area had become a place where people from different backgrounds came together, shared stories, and built the kind of community that everyone deserved to live in. Mrs. Henderson's attempt to make Angela feel unwelcome had backfired completely. Instead of driving Angela away, it had made her more connected to her community than ever before. And instead of maintaining the status quo, it had sparked changes that made Willowbrook Gardens a better place for everyone who lived there. Angela learned that sometimes the most difficult moments in life can lead to the most meaningful changes, and that standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, can create ripple effects that benefit everyone.